As you can see, for some of y'all, my man needs no introduction. And this young man has had a profound impact on a lot of my reading and just the way I kind of work my way through a lot of the current topics. And I really felt as if it would be a blessing, a benefit for you guys and for me as well to have him on and to discuss some of his latest writings. So without further ado, I present to y'all Mr. Samuel Say. Hey, can I call you Sam or you just, or is it Samuel? It's got to be
anything, just not Samantha. That's,
You definitely ain't got to worry about that here. Not on this show. That might be on somebody else's show, but not here. You ain't got to worry about that. How you doing today, brother?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. It's a true honor, and thank you for your very kind words. I'm encouraged by that.
Oh, that was from the heart. I don't, of course I want people to feel good and feel comfortable when they come on, but I'm not going to just give you a bunch of fluff. I keep it real because I've spent a lot of time reading your articles and man, and even on simple social media, just on some of your comments on Facebook have just been very encouraging. I love the boldness that you have, especially in a culture, in an age where boldness is oftentimes crapped on, forgive my language, or basically frowned upon, to be honest with you. So I appreciate that. But before we get into the specifics of why I wanted to have you on today, tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Who's Samuel Say? What encouraged you to get into writing, and when did you start writing?
Yeah, I was born in Ghana, West Africa. I've lost a lot of my accent. Sometimes I'll say some words that will expose my Ghanaian accent. For example, the word what is it? The word I'm even so I would say omnipotent. And right? And then one time I was at church and I just read it out loud. Everyone's like, "What did he just say?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." But it's what is it? Omnipotent, right, or something like that.
Yeah, that's how us Americans do it. Omnipotent.
Yeah. But but no, I was born in Ghana, West Africa. I was raised there by a single mother, a strong believer, my hero in the faith.
Amen.
I love Paul Washer, I love John MacArthur, I love Vadi Bokum, but my mom is my number one hero in the faith. She is an amazing woman, and so I was raised there. I went until I was 10, and then at 10 years old, we moved to Canada. Originally, I stayed in Canada for 25 years until just this past year. Actually, it's been almost a year since I moved to America, particularly Ohio, after I married my wife. But I was in Canada for 25 years. When I was in Canada, when I was 19, I was raised in the church. And then, but I was not a believer. My mom was faithful, and I knew the gospel was. I knew from a very young age that I was a child of wrath. I knew that the gospel. I knew that if I were to die, I would perish in my sins. And yet, just because you know the gospel doesn't mean that you believe the gospel, right? So I knew what the gospel said. I knew that I was, again, condemned, but I didn't believe and repent. And then at 19, there was a lady in my church who was very persistent. There was a young adults retreat that she really wanted me to go to, and I had no interest in that whatsoever. I was enjoying my life of sin. And every week she would come to me saying, "Sam, you got to come to this thing." I'm like, "Man, I don't have any interest. Please leave me alone." But she wouldn't stop. And I realize now that it was because it was the Holy Spirit really just, reaching out to me, because finally, just to really shut her up. I'm like, "You know what? You're annoying me. I'm just going to say yes to this thing so that you can leave me alone." I said yes. I went to this retreat. The very first night, I heard the gospel that I heard my entire life, and just clicked. I was born again, and I became a believer. Now, what's actually also interesting is I was raised in a very charismatic, in the charismatic world, and this time was actually particularly a prosperity gospel preacher. It was mostly heresy, but she, not he, by the way, she said Christ died for sinners. And that was one of the very few true statements in her sermon or her talk. And I believed. That was when I was 19. And I also, I was a bad student. I had never read a book in my life, really. I'd never really finished a book in my life. I now love books naturally because I'm a writer now, so I better like better like books. But I
Right.
hadn't really finished a book, and I remember that very night before I got saved, people kept mentioning this Apostle Paul guy. I'm like, who's the Apostle Paul? Now, I was raised in the church, but I didn't even know who Paul was because I didn't read
Mm.
the Bible. I'm sure I'd heard his name before from my mom or anybody else, but I just really wasn't listening. Um, and that made me really want to study the scripture so I can understand, who God is, know more about the God who has saved me. So I started studying, and I had more of a passion for theology, a passion for history, and I'm retaining all this truth that I just couldn't contain, and I really just wanted all my friends to know about it. So I developed a love for um, preaching and communicating, and I thought, you know what, the best way I could really share the gospel and to defend biblical theology, biblical truth, was through writing, because a couple years after I became a Christian, I ended up leaving that Prosperity Gospel Church. And since I was all sold out, all my friends were like, Sam, how could you leave that church? You love that church. And I, instead of calling every single person to say, hey, here's why I've left, I thought, you know what, let me just write on Facebook a long, Facebook has like Facebook notes, like a little Facebook blog. And I just
Yeah.
created a blog. And honestly, that was like my first real writing. And it went, I mean, I won't call it viral, but a lot of people way back in like 2010, before I started blogging,
Mm.
at Snow Right, they found it, including even Justin Peters somehow found it. He
Oh
commented on
wow.
it, and he and I are friends now. But at the time, he didn't know who I was, and it was just an incredible, because he had a big impact on me. Anyway, so that was my first bit of writing, and I really wanted to improve my writing, so I started studying books, started reading a lot to improve my writing. And then when Black Lives Matter really became an issue in 2014, a lot of my friends who were like solid believers started embracing Black Lives Matter. I saw how that was starting to, at least at the time, they seemed to be solid believers. That was harming their faith. It was harming how they saw their white church members, how they saw
Hmm.
pastors. I'm like, what is happening here? So I wanted to study Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, so that I would be able to understand its appeal to my friends, and also understand how to address the issue, um, how to destroy its tenets and everything. So I thought, again, instead of calling everyone again to say, hey, here's why I think you should stop embracing Black Lives Matter, I created my blog so that I would be able to just share it with them, and they would be able to see the faults within Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. And I suppose a lot of my friends did change their minds on it, and they started sharing it as well too on social media. And then my blog just kept growing till especially 2020, when everything happened the way it did.
Yeah, when the mess literally hit the fan in 2020. I mean, from COVID to George Floyd to the election, BLM, riots, Antifa, all that going on. That was a pivotal moment
Yes.
in it. That was now I'm born in 1970, dating myself. I own it proudly, I own
Yeah,
it
as
proudly.
you
I'm not
should.
ashamed.
You should. As you should.
Yeah, right, right. I didn't get this grade for nothing. They didn't just spring up one day. I earned this bad boy right here. But man, I'm telling you, in all the years I've been living, man, 2020 was it was just unreal.
Yeah.
And the years preceding that, because you referenced BLM, I remember the Lord saved me around 2010, 2011.
Mm.
And one of the things that he used to help build my faith and my knowledge was the like Christian hip hop scene.
Mm.
Artists
Mm.
like Shylin, Hazakim,
Same here.
Timothy Brindle, especially the Lamp Mode brothers,
Yeah.
especially those brothers from Lamp Mode Recordings. The Lord used those to really build my faith and to grow my knowledge theologically. I remember when I first heard Shylin. It was theology. Is it theology Q&A? Is that the one where he's talking to him and
Mike,
Stephen the lead? Stephen the Levite, or Atonement Q&A. Atonement Q&A, the
Yes,
first
yes,
one.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
on the Atonement album.
Yeah.
And I heard him rapping theology, justification, sanctification, glorification, and defining those terms while he's rapping. I was blown away. I mean, I was serious. I was listening to Wretched Radio,
Yeah.
which I used to listen to every day,
Yes.
and they played that song. The brother who's known as he's known as the Chocolate Knox. The brother,
Yes. 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 The I'm forgetting. Oh man,
I'm drawing a blank on his name, man. And I was what'd you say?
is it? It's not Devontae, is it? I just call him Chocolate Knox too. I'm forgetting what his actual full name is.
Yeah, I think most people know who we're talking about from Cross Politic.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
He actually was kind of like, I think he interned there with Wretched with Todd Friel back in the day. So he kind of brought that on. He brought that up, and they played it, and I was just blown away. And I spent the whole night. I literally did not go to bed till like 3 o'clock in the morning,
Wow.
listening to Shylin and discovering all these other rappers who were just deep theologically, and it was just blowing my mind. And the growth that took place as a result, partly as the Lord used them to bring glory to himself and to just build my knowledge. And but I say all that to say it was crazy how people who were so deep, and I'm not saying all of them got caught up in it, but I know quite a few of them did.
Yeah.
But it was crazy how men and women, primarily men who were so sound or appear to be, would end up getting caught up in the lies that is BLM and the social justice movement and critical race theory. And it was kind of disheartening, but I think it was also a good reminder that we're not supposed to put our trust in men. And we're supposed to always frame everything biblically, and God should be on the top. Not that men and godly women can't be a blessing to us. Of course they can, because God uses us in those fashions, in that manner. But it was a good lesson for me. It's just that, because like now, man, I'm like, man, who's to listen to nowadays? You know, I listen to a lot of the old school stuff. There's not that many, as far as I know. But going back to the main point of how those issues really impacted you in your writing, because when I look at it, I'm like, man, I would love to write, but I suck at writing. You know, that's the thing. I'll be honest with you. Grammar, I could spell. I was always a good speller, but grammar, man, bruh, we're talking a whole different world right there. I couldn't do it, but it sounds as if you just kind of developed a passion for writing, and you just basically learned on your own. Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, I had some older men who also loved writing and do writing, who also helped guide me too. But particularly, I've always loved Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon, the way he would just communicate so much that even now, more than 100 years after after he passed away, I still read his sermons. I read his books, because the way he wrote is just so, it transcends any. And for me, the reason why I've always loved writing, is that it really is something that can last throughout all generations. So that
Right.
was always fascinated me, which is why the Bible is very unique in that we know that it's timeless, right? So it's very relevant, and that's of course not because it's writing, because of God's wisdom and God's
Amen.
sovereignty in this. The scriptures are, of course, infallible and inspired, but yet I don't think it's an accident that it's all in written form. I think it's God's wisdom that writing, I think, is a very unique way of communication. Nevertheless, I also was not a natural. I wanted to quit so many times because I just couldn't get certain. I mean, not even just the grammar, the way they make a sentence sound good, and because it was just difficult. But I just really, just wanted to study hard. To be honest with you, I was like, man, maybe I'm not cut out for it, because English is not my first language. It's my second language. So I'm like, man, maybe I can't get it. And so I just studied for years and years, reading like 10 books on writing, trying to improve. And I'm still reading, because there's still a lot better writers out there than me. So I really want to improve. But yeah, it was just really wanting to emulate how Charles Spurgeon is able to communicate the gospel, communicate truth in such a beautiful and simple way. And I really wanted to do that in a much smaller scale, on on culture and on theology, just to make it simple. Because very much like you, I was very inspired and very very blessed by these gospel rappers, these Christian rappers, and
Mhm.
they were just preaching the whole time. I mean, they were preaching
Right.
theology, but through hip hop, and you would never really expect that, at least before their time, and just how they were able to teach me such. I mean, man, I was learning about deep things of theology in these songs. I'm like, man, while I don't teach too much deep theology in my articles, I wanted to easily explain difficult things to people, and that also really helped me to create my blog, to be slow to write.
Nice, nice. And now even that, slow to write. I mean, obviously that's a play on words from James.
Yeah.
So, like, what was the mindset behind that title?
I'm so glad you say it's obvious, because sometimes people are like, man, are you just saying that because you're just a very slow writer? I'm like, well, that's kind of true. That's kind of true, but I hoped you would know. Like on my old website, I even had James, what is that, man? I'm forgetting now the text. James 119
Hmm.
is 119 on it, so that people would know it's a reference to being slow to speak. And that's important because at the time, again, because of Black Lives Matter and the way the culture was, and it's still relevant today, you had people who were being quick to speak and slow to read, right?
Mm.
Or quick to write and slow to read. And I'm like, no, I want to carefully study what is being said, whether it's on police shootings and things like that. I don't want to just come up there and be an idiot, as the Bible says, right? If you're quick to speak, you are a fool. And I don't want to be a fool. I wanted to just slowly consider what is happening, and then slowly really think about, okay, how do I communicate this? Because God will hold me accountable for every word that I type. So yeah, that was how that came about. And I'm glad. I struggled for months trying to pick a title, and finally I came to slow to write. I'm like, you know what, that's not bad. Although now a lot of my enemies sometimes just say, they use that against me. They're like, man, you're just slow. you're just. So I was happy about that. They think they get at me. I'm like, yeah, I've been hearing it many times before, but no, I'm happy I went with that nickname.
Right. Yeah, eventually they'll get numb because, man, people will find reasons. Like back in the day, man, when I was growing up, I used to get picked on because of this big old melon head of mine. And I used to be so offended. I'd be mad. I'd be ready to fight somebody when I was a little kid. I'd be wanting to cry sometimes. But as I got older and heard it over and over again, I was just like, yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, I know. I got a big head. And I say, man, the Lord would bless me with a lot of brains. That's usually what I
Right.
say.
Amen.
Whether that's true or not, I guess that's a matter of perspective or opinion.
Yes.
But, I think he blessed me pretty good overall.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't look right if I had a small head because I'm not a little guy. I'm like 6'2", about 225, 230.
Oh
So
no.
having a little head would be kind of weird.
Hey.
So
So no, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, so take the insults, man. Let it roll off your back, man, because you're always gonna have detractors out there trying to tear you down.
Absolutely. And honestly, in many ways, I think I have significantly less of them now than in the beginning. Because in the beginning, they thought by insulting me that it would stop me. And
Mm.
I always say, man, I have an African mom. I've heard my mom would insult me. Like it was just pure jokes, right? Just humor. So I'm like,
Yeah.
you can't, like I laugh about it. I'm like, I'm human, but it's very hard to really offend me. So normally I just see some of the comments, I just laugh about it. Um, but no, and because they know they can't really influence me or change my mind, over time they just kind of give up anyways. So I now have very little. I mean, I might hear it, but it's not quite like it was before when they thought they could change my mind on these issues.
Yeah, that was something I dealt with a lot when I got into being more vocal about the current state of policing. When I would write, now you would think that with a lot of my friends who are in law enforcement, that a lot of them would have my back, and many of them did. And I would argue that the vast majority of them did. But
Hmm.
once I started delving into the role that politics play
Hmm.
on the current culture, all the upheaval we were dealing with, that's when people started getting a little more defensive on some of these issues because
Hmm.
especially when you're talking about black folks.
Mm.
when you start talking about the idol of the Democratic Party with black folks, man, like honestly, they were
Yeah.
coming after me left and right. And
Yeah.
these were people that have known me. Some of these people have known me for decades.
Wow.
And the true ones, they stayed true. They didn't agree. Some of them pushed back on me, but
Yeah.
we remain friends to this day. There were
Mm.
some who just like basically wrote me off, and they were just like, they stopped following me, they unfriended me, they blocked me or whatever. And at first I was kind of bothered by it, but I said, you know what, it is what it is. It what do they say? Like hardship sometimes reveals character.
Yeah.
And the fact that we couldn't agree at times to disagree, it
Mm.
just our friendship wasn't worth that. Wasn't worth saving in their mind. I was like, so be it.
It's so fascinating. Unfortunately, what happened with you has happened with me as well too. And whether it's also Virgil or Daryl or
Yeah.
a lot of our like-minded brothers, it's fascinating that when relationships are damaged by our views, it's never us saying, "Well, we can't be friends with you." It's
Right.
always, always them saying, "Well, we can't." So here we are. They can call us an Uncle Tom. They can call
Mm.
us coon. They can say all these things, and we'll say, "You know what? Hey, what you're saying, we're disappointed by it. It might even offend us, but you're still my cousin. Yeah, and sometimes it's family. You're my
Oh
cousin.
yeah.
You're my sibling. You're my friend. You're my church member. You're whatever it is. I still love you." And then they will say, "Well, look, man, but no, unless you believe what I believe, I
Mhm.
cannot be your friend or acquaintance or anything like that." That just goes to show just the slave mentality in that way, just how much of a cult it really is that you're willing to reject someone who's very happy to receive you, but to reject them because although you've known them all your life, because
Mhm.
of this current climate, all of a sudden you recognize that there's now a radical force. By force, I just mean the culture, and of course, is really influenced by Satan.
Right.
There's this force in our society now that is prompting you to say that even though I know who you are, because you don't believe what the culture is saying you have to believe, I'm going to reject you to protect myself, and that's just sad.
Yeah. It's and even worse. It's bad enough when family members who aren't believers or friends who aren't believers do it. But when you have brothers and sisters in the Lord who should know better, should have sound theology. But I think one thing that I've often wrestled with, and I've thought about this, and let me know what your thoughts are on this. Is
Mhm.
just, and I think you pretty much already touched on it a bit. It just shows the deep levels of indoctrination.
Yes.
I've often told my pastor this, and he's a white man. We've grown to be good friends over the last few years, and I said, when you're born, especially here in the U.S., I don't know what it's like in Canada. I said, but when you're born as a black person in the United States, I said, you get your birth certificate, they take your little footprints, and then they hand you a Democratic voter card. I said, that's the level of indoctrination that goes on here.
Yep.
Because if you dare to
Yeah.
step out off the plantation, as some folks say, or step out of line and say that you're going to no, I'm not going to follow this group of people because
Yeah.
their ideology, their views are godless. They don't glorify God. They're blasphemous. They're evil. They're sinful. Everything, or I would say everything, but the vast majority of things that they promote are sinful.
Yep.
If you look at the current platform of the Democratic Party, for instance, and I wasn't even planning on having this discussion, but here we are. We're talking about what kind of brought you into writing and some of the things that got you inspired to write. But when you look at their current platform and you look at transgenderism, gay marriage, a radical, even more radical, abortion is bad enough in and of itself. It's evil, it's sinful. But when you're talking about all the way up until birth, and in some cases, even after birth, they're arguing for,
Yep.
how can anybody in their right mind, defunding the police, how can anybody, especially a professing believer, a
Yep.
professing Jesus follower, say, hey, yeah, I'm going to put my support behind them. And
Yes.
how they do it, I believe, is because our society has built racism up to be the
Yes.
greatest sin anyone could possibly commit.
Man,
So go ahead, I'm done. Go ahead.
man. You're. I can't nod my head, enough. I, there's so much I want to say about this because, well, before I get to that, in terms of racism being the worst offense, I wrote an
Mm-hmm.
article actually right before George Floyd. I think I'm forgetting his name. I think it was Alton Sterling. No,
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with Alton
yeah.
Sterling. But
Oh, of course you would be. Yeah. Um, Actually, no. I don't think it was him. Actually, that was I think in 2017. In 2020, I'm forgetting the young man who was killed. Right, it was May 2020. It was right before George Floyd. It was the two. I think it was in Florida, maybe, or maybe Georgia. The two white. I think they were brothers who chased after him, and then they shot him. I'm forgetting.
Dante, is that Dante Wright?
No,
Or
no.
Don,
I'm
I'm
forgetting
draw,
the name, but I wrote
yeah, I'm
about.
drawing a blank right now, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And I basically said the anger was more about, well, they did it because they were racist, not because they thought they may have murdered.
Mm,
But no. The real issue is racism instead of a life
right.
has been taken, whether justified or not. And then I mentioned abortion. How we don't that no one says anything about that because the Democrats don't frame that as racism, right? Although obviously you and I know with the Negro Project and everything else going on with it, there is a
Abs-
yeah,
Absolutely.
but there is this the Democrats, leftists have been able to convince, manipulate a lot of black people into really just focusing. It's like we miss everything except for the word racism, and this will get into. I know what we want to talk about. It's so bad that
Ahmaud Arbery, for the record. Ahmaud Arbery.
Arbery. That's what it was. Ahmaud
Yeah.
Arbery. Yes, yes, yes. But it's so bad. Not only do we accept abortion, do we accept, frankly, things like illegal immigration, which is harming Black Americans the most.
Yeah,
Um,
no doubt.
we embrace things like, well, so not only critical race theory, for example, which is going to harm all people, but especially Black people too. You have defunding the police, which is only going to kill more Black lives. Mothers are going to be more childless. It's just insanity. But
Right.
then, especially the issue of gay marriage and transgenderism and everything else. I don't want to move too fast, but
No, you're
one thing
good, man.
I am so offended by the so-called respect the marriage bill is that, as I mentioned in my article, it really does frame my black skin as it says that my black skin is essentially just like a gay man's sexual behavior. That's
Mm,
what it says. Now, biblically, I know that sexual sin, that homosexual sin is perverse. So that means that you're saying that my skin is perverse. That is
mm.
racism. It is deeply disturbing. But yet the Democrats have been able to manipulate us so much that so many black people, so many black pastors refuse, which is another thing, by the way, and you know this. So many black pastors. I'm working on an article right now. Um, I might post it around maybe Black History Month, saying that the black church needs reformation. Um,
Mm.
and a lot of it is that even when it comes to things like LGBTQ issues, so many black pastors who are proving themselves to be false teachers are embracing these ideas, and a lot of it is because of their loyalty to the Democratic Party instead of their loyalty to Christ. So it's just insane how a lot of times where they'll talk about the Republicans. Now I'm not a Republicans have their failures, right? So I'm not
Oh,
really
yeah, definitely.
have to support them. But the point is that people are so focused on systemic racism and the Republicans being racist and all this stuff that they're not really, and some see it, but many are not realizing that everything they hate about what's happening in the culture in terms of the real disparities that people are facing in America, it is primarily because of the Democrats. But then even behind that is primarily because of a godless society that hates the things of Christ.
Man, that's it. That's really it. And to piggyback off of what you said when you referenced the black pastors, and I would say that it would. I wish I was. Not can't say I would say. I wish I could say it was only the ones who have bad theology, like your Creflo Dollars, your T.D. Jakeses, and your Jamal Bryant's. But we see it in being indoctrinated, being brought into a lot of these Reformed churches.
Yeah.
People who have historically been known to be some of the greatest theologians in history
Yeah.
were from the Reform camp.
Yeah.
And when you see people that a few years ago, back in the day, I can't even say a few years ago now, but back in the day, like Eric Mason, he was like really influential. I was really blessed by that brother. But then when you hear him go to that MLK 50 conference a few years back, and saying, calling somebody an Oreo or a coconut, black on the out, brown on the outside, white on the inside. I'm like, what is that, man? Like, what is that? Like, where do you get off saying that, especially as a professed man of God, speaking before other men and women of God? Like, and that, to me, that was it. And I hope somebody corrected him. I doubt it, because those issues people are so afraid to touch these issues. I doubt anybody corrected him.
Yeah.
But what was old girl? I'm drawing a blank on names today. What was old girl who ran for governor? I don't think she ran for governor this last time in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams.
Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
Where was she at? She was at Creflo Dollar's church.
Yep.
And I'll probably insert a clip right here in this video where she stood up and everybody applauded for her, and he basically praised her and said people need to be, and they stood up there and they were like praying for her. And then Raphael Warnock was at somebody else's church, and they were lifting up hands. You know how they do in a lot of the charismatic churches where they got their hand up and they point towards it. And I'm sitting up there like, and Dr. Michael Brown showed this video. And I'm sitting up there like, you got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me. Just look at what this man stands for. Just look at what he says. He's all about critical race theory. He's an advocate for the LGBTQ culture, society. And he's standing up there preaching to these people, and they're encouraging these folks. I think T.D. Jakes also had someone else he was advocating for. I just really don't understand where we are going. But considering how we've already been there, let me bring this up here real quick. Bring up this article that you wrote so we can have a little conversation about it. Now, you wrote an article back in, when did this come out? I was looking for a date on here.
November 19th.
November 19th, where you said the title of it, and the title of it wasn't controversial at all. Gay marriage isn't the new interracial marriage. You already touched on it a bit, brother, but what inspires you? And there are a couple of little places in here I'd like to talk about. Well, what was your heart behind writing this article?
Yeah. So one, the title is actually influenced by an old article by Vadi Bokum, actually on the Gospel Coalition years ago, back when the Gospel Coalition seemed to care more about the gospel than they do now. But that's a different issue.
Right.
Yeah, the title I think was "Gay is Not the New Black." That was what the article was titled. His article. He also had sermons on it too and everything else. But I thought, you know what?
Excellent sermon, by the way. Excellent sermon.
Yes, brilliant. So I thought, you know what? It was time to write, a somewhat spiritual. By spiritual, I just mean like a indirect, hopefully, sequel to what he had said. Not that I'm worthy of stepping on it, stepping into his shoes, but I just thought, you know what, that had really inspired me. So let me try to write what perhaps a follow-up to that article, because he wrote that article, I think, in light of what was happening with Roberta Fall, right? So he was saying, hey, let's address that. And now the so-called Respect for Marriage Act was about to be about to become law. So I thought, you know what? Let me write about that. So for those who may not know, the Respect for Marriage Act, everyone is talking about what it says about gay marriage, right? And that's
Right.
very, very important, and how it's going to affect not just more of our society and how we think about gay marriage, but also how it's going to deal with the issue of liberty, in, for the church. But the thing that I focused on in this article was that in that same bill, it essentially also claimed that they were trying to protect interracial marriage. And they were really saying that gay marriage really is the new interracial marriage. They're saying that a lot of us Christians, a lot of us, conservatives who are against interracial marriage, we're just like the people in the 50s or 60s who were against interracial marriage. Was what is it, Virginia versus Loving, or I'm forgetting what the title.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on it, but I think that might have been it. Yeah, I think you got. I know you kind of got it mixed up there. You said I know originally you said they say that us conservatives or Christians who are against gay marriage are similar to people who
Oh,
are against gay marriage
I'm
or
sorry.
are against interracial marriage back in the day. I knew what you meant, but I
Yeah,
just want to clarify it for the audience.
yeah. Sorry for that, and I
No,
appreciate
no problem.
you doing that. So the article was really to explain really how offensive and how racist that suggesting is, and then to explain the differences between interracial marriage and gay marriage.
No, very good, very good. Let me read a little bit of it here. I'm gonna put it back up on the screen here for everybody. Because at first you basically, I mean, you start off out the gate hot. The Respect for Marriage Act doesn't respect marriage at all. A more accurate name for the bill is the Disrespect for Marriage Act. And then you go into how the ADF, Alliance for Defending Freedom, described the bill as not merely a law that codifies the Supreme Court's ruling on Obergefell, gay marriage, as federal law, but a, quote, misnamed bill that expands not only what marriage means, but also who can be sued for disagreement with the new meaning of marriage. And one of the things I want to bring up, and I thought you also brought up so eloquently in the article, was how and we were already talking about how the political left is so cunning, for lack of a better word, and they're really good at what they do. They are excellent politicians. But it's all done from a element of deceit. They'll take an issue that they know nobody's going to touch, which is interracial marriage. They know nobody's going to argue that issue. And then they'll marry it with one of their radical views. And then if you go against it, if you say that I don't stand for this or I think this is wrong, then you must be a racist. Because the majority of people who are conservative or people who are Republican are white. So if you're against this so-called respect for marriage bill, then it must mean it can't be for any other reason other than the fact that you don't like interracial marriage.
Yes.
And there are people out there who are just so naive enough to believe it. That's why they were able to get away with, for months, calling the bill in Florida the Don't Say Gay bill.
Yes.
Because they mischaracterize it. They create a straw man, maybe not even the proper term, but it's something that can be easily attacked. Just like this is what they're against. So if they're against interracial marriage, they say they're against the the whole gay, they're against gay marriage, but it's probably, I mean, they'll already call us homophobes for that, or transphobes, whatever it may be. But they'll say it's got to be deeper than that. They really don't want to see minorities or blacks and whites or various people of different ethnic backgrounds get together. And I think that scares a lot of people, because a lot of people don't even want to get involved. They don't want to be looked upon as being racist. So instead of fighting against these things, and they'll just cave, which is why we saw so many Republicans hook up with them. I think it was like 12, which is what ultimately enabled it to go through. But if you want to, I don't know if you remember right offhand, what are some, if not, I can read from the article. What were some of the issues that were of concern for you in regard to this whole act, or this whole bill anyway?
Yeah, there was probably 4 or 5 that I'll try to remember all of them. And if I forget some of them, you can go ahead and read it out or remind me. But one of the biggest ones that I already mentioned, I think, or referenced was what it says about black skin, right? Because if you're saying that sexuality, which is a behavior, right?
Mm,
And which again, this is not I'm studying from Body Bokum here, where one of the reasons why he says that gay isn't the new black is that you can choose not to behave in a homosexual manner, right? In the sense that it is not an identity; it's a behavior. Today, we like to make our behaviors an identity, but it's not. It's a behavior. Um, but my skin color now, that's not necessarily an identity either, but it is immutable in a sense, right? It is something that is intrinsic that
right.
I have black skin. Um, so when I go out, people can say, "Oh yeah, that man has black skin." When a gay person goes out, unless they're being very flamboyant, I mean,
Right.
you're not going to know, right? So, but the biggest thing is, again, when you say that my black skin, which is not ungodly, is like a sexual behavior that is ungodly, that is racist. You've compared my black skin to sin, right?
Mm,
Which is really racism. So I addressed that in the article, and then especially when it comes to the issue of interracial marriage and gay marriage, when they say that, well, that the two are the same, which again is what the law is really suggesting, that they want to protect both, but they're saying that they're the same. Well, here's the issue with that, and I reference this later on in the article. When God says that for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave and hold fast to his wife or cleave to his wife, it doesn't say that for this reason a black man will leave his parents and cleave to his black wife. It says
right.
a man cleaving to a wife. So regardless of what my wife's skin color looks like, it is godly, it is honorable to God. But it absolutely doesn't say a man should leave his parents and cleave to a man. So to compare the two is completely ridiculous. Not just on an objective level, obviously, when it comes to just the obvious idea that, well, there are natural reasons as to why a man should be able to marry another man. And really, there
Absolutely.
is no such thing as gay marriage anyway, which I mentioned, right? That it's
Hmm.
impossible since God is the one who instituted instituted marriage. There's no such thing as a man marrying another man. It is a fake marriage. But my marriage to my wife is not fake, and nor is it perverse in front of God. It's an abomination before God. So for them to make the comparison is deeply, deeply troubling and offensive.
Yeah, it's kind of like someone attempting to say that here's my brother and that's my sister, but it's actually a woman. Like here's my brother,
Yeah.
but that's actually my sister or like my mom.
Yep.
You're attempting to redefine what this relationship is.
Yes.
It's something that kind of just popped into my head, and people like to argue. I remember recently Matt Walsh from Daily Wire was on the Joe Rogan show, and they were having that conversation about gay marriage. And I think Matt Walsh was really underprepared because he's a professing Catholic, Roman Catholic, and without getting into the discussion about
Mm.
a lot of their theological issues that they have, he refused to reference it from a biblical perspective. He
Yep.
was trying to deal with it from a cultural thing, how it impacts the culture. Not that I'm saying that should be ignored, but I think if you profess to serve the God of the Bible
Yep.
and you profess him as your Lord, you say that he saved you. The idea that we're going to try to make our cases continually from a secular worldly perspective, I think you're ultimately going to find yourself on rocky ground or sinking sand because that foundation will ultimately collapse. And I get him. Now I can understand people making evidential arguments on various topics and stuff like that, and
Yep.
saying how it's impacted. But I, it's unfortunate how so many people And getting back to partly to what we were discussing earlier, how so many professing Christians are so easy to get caught up in the cultural environment and not want to be offensive. How
Yeah.
many times have we heard, even in the "Gay is not the new black" sermon or presentation from Vody a few years ago?
Mhm.
And I even posted a video recently on Facebook, on my personal Facebook page, where he says how pastors, before they get into addressing the issue of homosexuality, he said they'll die at the death of 1,000 apologies. Well, before we get started, I
Yeah.
don't want to offend anybody. I want everybody to know
Yeah.
that I don't hate gay people. Some
Yeah.
of my best friends are gay.
Yeah.
And I understand that they've struggled and they've been through a lot of difficult times. He
Yeah.
said, but try that with any other sin. How
Yeah.
ridiculous will we look? I love that part. He
Yeah.
says, yeah, before we get started, I just want everybody to know I love murderers. Murderers are some of the best people I know. I
Yeah.
even have murderers in my family.
Yep.
But and so I want everybody to know that I'm not here to offend any murderers out there. So if you're a murderer out there, just know that you're welcome to come here. And not that that's not true.
Yeah.
Of course, a murderer would be welcome into the church.
Yeah.
But we don't do that anywhere. But when it comes down to the issue of anything that falls under that LGBTQ umbrella, because our society has villainized those of us who promote a biblical perspective on what sin is and what sin isn't.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm completely with you. It's we are so afraid, which is why I intentionally in my article I intentionally say I won't miss words. Um,
Mm.
I don't want anybody to be shocked by what I'm going to say. I'm like I'm going to be, and when I wrote that article, so many man, I had the LGBTQ mafia. They came after me. They were so angry with me.
I started to ask you what was the
Oh yeah.
reaction
Oh, they
overall?
were upset. Like they were tagging me in their group, so many of them were coming to my page, and they
Wow.
were. And you know what's funny? I remember saying to a friend, it gave me a greater insight about just how what's the word I want to was, and I would say the word inclusive. And I mean inclusive in a bad way. I mean in a good way. I mean in a bad way. It, that homosexual sin is so inclusive. What I mean by that is this: when that was happening, they were really trying to invite me to agree in their sin. They like no other group of sinners so desperate
Mm.
want you to join their sin, either in pleading with you, not pleading really, but trying to compel you, force you to agree with them by canceling you or harassing you. Sometimes they'll send perverse images just trying to disturb you. And all of that, I thought about Lot as in Sodom and Gomorrah, where the angel they were pleading with them, and the angels, join us, join us.
Yes.
Nothing has changed. They so desperately want affirmation because they want you to join their sin. So when that was happening, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. It's the same thing or the same desire, anyways. So anyway, yeah, so they came after me, but I mean, I'm like, okay, you're not going to change my mind. But what was interesting too is that they naturally ended up saying racist things, of course, right? And it was fascinating. I was really hoping that a lot of the critical race theorists who have not yet gone to the point of embracing all of critical race theory, including the aspects where you do affirm, the sexual sins,
Yeah.
I was hoping they would see that because they naturally, in their hatred over how I was saying, no, my black skin color isn't like your sexual sin. They were so desperate to say, yes, it is, that again, they end up saying racist things. Um, so yeah, but when it comes to the cowardice from so many people, it is sad because when he wrote that article, it was before Black Lives Matter and everything. And the people that you were already seeing who were so scared of offending gay people, naturally, once critical race theory became prominent in our culture, they became very easy to become really victims and then end up being vulnerable and embracing Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. Because if you are afraid of something as obvious as sexual sin, when your own church members start saying, hey, since you don't agree with Black Lives Matter, that means that you hate me then as your church member, right? You are already now vulnerable and you're already weak in the faith because you just are so afraid of offending people that God calls, frankly, as an abomination. And that's not to attack. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing like, oh, but the reality is that's not to be attacking anybody. It's simply to say the truth. It's simply to say what God says, that this is judgment. The judgment is not simply a Sodom and Gomorrah type event happening. The judgment is the act of itself, is that our society has embraced sexual sin to such a degree that we would now affirm gay marriage as a virtue, and that we would be
Mm.
we now essentially we celebrate so-called gay marriage more than we celebrate real marriage, and that's really sad.
Yeah, because you can't turn on any TV program or anything without a commercial popping up where you see someone, a couple kissing, a gay couple kissing or something like that. It's pervasive. It's like everywhere. And just going off of what you were saying, as far as how sexual immorality is like the fruit of man's rebellion, we can always go to the Romans 1,
Hmm.
where from I'll start in verse 24, 23. No, let's start with 24. Therefore, God also abandoned them in the lust of their hearts to the impurity, to the degrading of their bodies amongst themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve the creation rather than the creator. And then verse 26, he says, for this reason, God abandoned them to their degrading passions.
Yeah.
For their women exchanged natural relations for that which is contrary to nature. Likewise, also the men, giving up natural relations with women, burned in their lust towards one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and deceiving in themselves, and receiving in themselves a due penalty of their error. Or those of us who are familiar with Romans 1, and particularly the second half of it, understand that it's the rejection of the truth of God's existence,
Yeah.
the suppression that those who are professing disbelievers go through is ultimately the fact that they start worshiping the creature rather than the creator, and it's that sin that God ultimately punishes, and
Yeah.
it's demonstrated from what I read when I read the scripture. That's one of the outpourings of that rebellion and that suppression, and God giving them over is the sexual immorality, as in particularly homosexuality. And a
Exactly.
lot of people don't like touching on that. Yes, is it controversial in a society that elevates that to almost a godlike status? Yeah, it is. It's very offensive to them. That's hence the reason why they came for you so tough. Honestly, how many music artists and pastors over the years have, when they're on a larger scale platform
Yeah.
and they're questioned about these issues, oh, like if you could, Kirk Franklin, that was one of the biggest ones. My man just tap danced. All he needed was a top hat and a cane and the tap shoes,
or,
because he was backpedaling on that.
or Lecrae, Grace in Space. Grace in space, man. Grace in space. Again, these guys talk about speaking truth to power. Talk about man. They're not. They're unashamed. Even back in
Right, back in
and
the day.
yeah, man. They will speak the truth to these white racists and so and so and so and so. Whatever. But then when it comes to the LGBT people, hey
Oh,
man, oh no. That goes to show you. See, here's funny. No one's talking really about LGBT supremacy. No one's talking about that. They're all quiet. Because you might think, well, you can say this, and it's true, that because of, now that's what I'm saying this word because it's a mouthful for me, but intersectionality,
yes,
because of that, it's silencing so many. I oftentimes say, look, as an African man, my culture is very strongly against homosexuality.
right.
You try to tell me I gotta believe what you now. Obviously, the most important is what the Bible says, right? But
Amen.
I use that argument against them, and I say, well, once you said no, I have to agree with you on homosexuality or transgenderism. You're really saying that my African culture means nothing to you. which is true for them.
Hmm.
And when I say that, they get furious and everything else. But since, at least for a long time, the majority of black people being raised in the church, that we had these views that we said, no, this is a sin. It's changing now, sadly, but that was a norm for a long time. That all these people, they could say, wait a minute, hey, I was raised in the church. This is what I believe. This is what so-called black culture tends to believe. Why are you rejecting our views on this? They won't say that because they recognize that there is an LGBTQ supremacy right now in our culture, or especially in their own woke culture, and they don't want to offend that, so they ignore that. But where the money is, where everyone is okay, where you can say whatever you want, is if you talk about white supremacy. Even though, now here's the thing: if white supremacy is really a thing, you're going to be a lot more fearful of really talking about it. But if you know it's not an issue, you can say it with no consequence. But again, LGBTQ supremacy is a real thing. So before you speak about it, you're gonna think very carefully. You're gonna be afraid, which is why you say, "Well, grace and space," because yeah, and then you compare your child being gay to, well, you know what, you like basketball, but they just happen to like soccer. You know,
Oh Lord,
Lecrae was basically saying, which
who
is
said that? Who
Lecrae,
said? Oh my God,
Lecrae.
when he comes on, I can't even watch him. Honestly, I can't even watch him because I know he's gonna piss me off.
Yeah,
Excuse my language. He's gonna get me mad. I can't watch him, man. Everybody, like some of my Facebook friends are like, Moldro or Eric, have you seen this video? I'm like, man, I'm not trying to have my day ruined. It's bad enough I gotta watch some of these police videos that are all violent, people get shot up. I'm
yeah.
not trying to have this dude who just continues to water down the faith and walk further and further away from it. I ain't trying to, man.
I'm with you. Lecrae has had one of the biggest. I mean, I was saved in '06. Lecrae's first album came out in '06, and I heard him for the first time months after I became a Christian, and I was like, whoa, because I loved hip hop, man. I'm like, and I have to give it up because I couldn't listen to what I was listening to before. It was
Right.
just hurting my soul. So when I finally heard of Lecrae, I'm like, man, Jesus music, and it was unashamed, and I was loving. So to see how he's just I mean, his path has just been sad. So I'm with you. So, but even then, that interview still surprised me because I didn't
Hmm.
think he had reached that point where he would be so ashamed of the gospel. Ironically enough,
Man, oh man. It reminds me of, I remember a few years back, I think it was a Oscar, and not that I watch it, I think I just saw a clip. I think it was Chris Rock who was telling jokes. This was a couple years before he got the slap, where Will
ah,
Smith slapped the taste out of his mouth. This is a few years prior when he did the Academy Awards show. I think he had referenced something to do with somebody being gay, but then he said, "Oh, I'm not going there. I don't want that. I don't want them coming after me."
yeah,
Everybody knows
yeah,
that is the one group. I can't say the one group but that is probably the main group that if you offend, you're at risk of losing everything. Your
yeah.
career, your job, everything, your reputation. Do you remember a few years ago when I can remember it was when Chris Broussard from ESPN, he was having there was an interview he had with a professing gay Christian
Yeah.
co-host of his or another broadcaster on ESPN. They two were having a discussion, and Chris Broussard stood on God's word and said, "I believe that if you commit homosexuality, you," and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not going to get 100%, but you are going directly against God's word. And man, they had him on the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne and all them, and they were mocking him, and everybody was talking about it, trying to cancel him.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he says he doesn't believe that it was a reason for him leaving ESPN because he said, but he did in a recent interview, he said he did believe that they didn't want him doing commentary as much anymore, offering
Yeah.
up his opinion. They wanted him to do sideline reporting at the basketball games, at the NBA games. But as far as him appearing on First Take and some of these other shows, they weren't trying to have all that. But all because of his Christian worldview
Yeah.
and the fact that And then we look at the mess ESPN, man. I used to watch ESPN all the time. You look at the mess they become. They
Yeah.
become about as woke as you can possibly get. I don't even watch it anymore. I mean, it's everywhere, man. This whole woke culture. It's ingrained itself in every aspect of our society, and I definitely appreciate you addressing it in the manner that you have.